Welcome. My name is Rodney Andrews. I'm a senior researcher for the Texas Schools Project and a member of the economics faculty here at the University of Texas at Dallas. Today we'll be hearing from Mike Lovenheim. Mike is a professor at Cornell at the School of Policy Analysis and Management. He's published extensively in public finance, higher ed, smoking, has a little bit on alcohol. He's a well-rounded applied public finance and labor guy. He received his PhD from the University of Michigan in 2007, and he was a Searle Freedom Trust postdoctoral fellow at the Stanford Institute for Economic Policy Research from 2007 to 2009. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Lovenheim.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Thank you for the nice introduction, Rodney. And for those graduate students in the audience, that postdoc I had was just a fantastic deal. So it should be on your radar as something to look at when you're on the market. So, anyways, so I'm going to talk today about a paper I'm doing with Locke Reynolds, who's another 2007 Michigan PhD. That's all I hang out with, actually. So, Rodney too. So on the effect of housing wealth on college choice, using evidence from the housing boom. There's a couple of motivations for studying a topic like this. The first, and I think the biggest one, is that there's a growing literature, I think, suggesting that there's pretty sizable returns to attending a higher quality university, however defined. There are wage returns, there's educational attainment returns, and obviously those are related. This is kind of a laundry list of some of the recent stuff that was done. Ehrenberg, Brewer and Ehrenberg have some earlier work using the NLS 72 and the High School and Beyond, and Black and Smith have some later work using the NLS Y79, but kind of similar cohorts to the Brewer and Ehrenberg papers, using a kind of selection on observables models, and they find pretty sizable returns to going to a higher quality university. Mark Hoekstra has a really nice paper in Restat that's forthcoming or might be out by now, using a regression discontinuity design in, well, can I say the state? Is that, all right, in Florida. He's not allowed in the paper, but it's like this open secret, right? So it's in Florida, using this discontinuity rule in GPA and SAT scores that the University of Florida employed for admission. And he finds a 24% increase in earnings from attending the state flagship, which is a massive increase, although it's hard. I mean, the drawback of this paper is it's unclear what the counterfactual is, right? So you don't know what happened to people who didn't go to University of Florida.
Got in Restat?
Yeah, well, it's a really nice RD design. So
And we know very little about wages and the returns to...
Exactly. I mean, this is a topic where some has been done, but not a lot, right? So and so it's an important paper and topic, and he, I think, has a credible stab at it. Dale and Kruger have probably the most famous paper in this literature in the QJE. Basically, they do, well, it's a fixed effects model, but you can think of it as a matching model where they take people who got into similar institutions but made different choices about what types of schools to go to. And they find that there's really not much evidence that going to a school with higher average SAT scores affects your wages, but that there seem to be somewhat large returns to attending a school with higher tuition, which can be seen as a proxy for quality. There are effects on lower education, or on lower income students for these measures. So this is some evidence that there's a return to quality. This paper's come under a lot of fire, particularly, look at Carolyn Hoxby has a recent JEP paper where she just attacks this paper based on the notion that, when you look at a bunch of people who got into Harvard and then the one person who went to like UMass, why is that the right counterfactual, basically? And so she actually is a huge fan of this paper. But anyways, that's Caroline's read on the literature. And then Locke Reynolds and C.C. Rouse have separate papers looking at trying to identify the negative labor market returns and find negative labor market returns of beginning at a 2-year college relative to a 4-year college. And they also find a negative effect of starting at a 2-year college on educational attainment. People are less likely to get a 4-year degree than observationally similar students who began at a 4-year school. And then in some recent work I have with John Bound and Sarah Turner, we show that attending a selective public or private school increases the likelihood of completing a BA. And actually, in another paper, we show that it reduces time to degree. And then Kurlander and Long also have a paper showing that starting at a two-year school negatively affects the likelihood of completion. And so my read on this is that, aside from this brilliant work, all these papers have some issues with identification. But obviously, not the top one. But all of them have kind of issues with identification. That nothing's perfect. Obviously, every paper has issues with identification. But they all attack this problem from kind of different perspectives using different sources of variation. And most of them are pretty consistent in finding that there are labor market returns to attending a higher quality institution. And so the question then is, we want to understand the decision processes of students. And almost nothing is known about how students select colleges on the intensive margins, so thinking about college quality. And in particular, we're interested in understanding how financial resources of the family play into that decision, right? Are there students who get into higher quality or higher resource schools and don't go because it costs too much? And that's really the question we want to know, particularly if you believe this literature that it has long-run positive outcomes. And that's exactly the kind of question we're going to try and answer today. And as you might imagine, identifying the causal effect of college costs or family financial resources on college choices is extremely hard due to the kind of straightforward endogeneity concern that families who have more money or more resources have kids who are more prepared for college. And it's often hard to control for those factors with simple observables. All right? Although with enough observables, it should be possible to do this. And so we're going to propose to overcome this problem using housing wealth variation supplied by the most recent housing boom. And I'll talk extensively about the identification issues, so don't worry. Oh, I should say, feel free to chime in when you want to, so don't, at will. Econ rules are in full force, and yeah, so feel free to just, yell things at me. So the idea of it is take two families who live in a city, and they are going to have kids of different ages who come of college age at different times. And because the size and the magnitude and the timing of the housing boom differed across cities, we can leverage the fact that different kids, depending on their age and where they lived in 1997, got hit with different shocks to the housing market, right? And then the key is to try and motivate to you that that type of variation is plausibly exogenous, and that's what I'm going to try and do. The unfortunate truth is I'm not going to be able to tell you, and in fact no one can tell you, why the housing boom happened in this time, at this place, in this magnitude, right? So we don't have that underlying mechanism nailed down, and I mean there are housing economists who are studying this and they don't know the answer to this, right? So, but what I'm going to try and do is show you that the most plausible alternative explanations of the data do not bear out in what we find. And if you have other interpretations then, or other potential endogeneity stories, I would love to hear them.
Yes. For clarity, I want to understand, are you looking at the college in terms of what is a quality college or college in terms of price? Like I imagine Harvard is high on the list of quality schools in these departments or what have you, and it's also high on the price list.
Yeah, so we're gonna be defining quality. I'll get there in a little bit, but in multiple different ways because it's very hard to think about how one might characterize quality. In fact, that's the point of the Black and Smith paper is they go through this kind of extensive analysis of college quality and try and generate indices of this. And so we're gonna do this in some different ways. One of the things we're gonna look at is tuition, but we're gonna look at a lot of other indices of prices. So when we get there, if I haven't answered it, ask it again. So, but yeah, very good question. So let me just say also, I mean, the other thing I think we want to know the answer to this question is there's just a general policy interest, I think, or at least I argue, in understanding the behavioral effects of housing price variation, right? Given what's happened to housing prices in this country in the past decade and the importance of housing wealth in people's asset portfolios. We want to understand how this asset affects individual behavior. And I kind of have a research agenda that explores a lot of these issues in education, in health, in fertility. And so this fits into that as well. And later I can talk to people about those other papers if you're interested. So the general research question is whether selection of college quality, however defined, and we're going to define it in several ways, is responsive to short-run variation in family housing wealth. And by short run, we're going to look at 4-year changes in housing wealth when the kid's in high school. So from when they're 14 to 18. You could look at 2 years. 4 years is, I don't know. I've used it in other work, so I kind of wanted to be consistent. But I don't have any reason to believe that's what's driving the results. So there's a lot of reasons to think, as I've just kind of intimated, that housing wealth is a very important, that if people are going to be responsive to resource variation, that they should be responsive to housing wealth. So first of all, 85 to 90% of households with, who send their kids to college own their home. So housing wealth represents the largest asset for most households. And for many households, it's their only asset other than their wages, right? Well, I mean, other than their human capital, I should say. So we're thinking about particularly families who might be on the margin of being credit constrained, right? The home is going to be really the only asset they have. And so this is an important aspect of the family finances that we're able to get variation in. So the recent housing boom as well was this really nice time to study the effect of housing prices because of two very important aggregate trends that were occurring in this time period. The first is what I think everyone thinks of when they think of the housing boom, is a massive change in the price of homes. And this is US price index of home prices. The bottom line are nominal prices, and the top are real prices. And as you can see, actually, prior to the late 1990s, there was some variation in home prices, but it really wasn't that big. And then, I mean, in the late 90s to about 2006, just an explosion in home prices in the US. I mean, we know this, right? But this is a dramatic graphic. So, and then the decline that we also have experienced. So this is a time period when there was a lot of variation in this asset price for families, and so it creates a nice opportunity to study this question. And the second piece that's very important that gets almost as much attention and is there was an explosion in the liquidity of this asset, right? So it became much easier to extract the wealth in your home without selling the house using home equity loans, home equity lines of credit, and cash out refinances. And indeed, you can see, so this is home equity extraction. This is the flow, is a percent of real income. And the top line is just the raw data. This is from Greenspan and Kennedy from the flow of funds accounts, the Fed flow of funds accounts. And it increased from 1990 from 2% to 12% by 2004, right? And most of it was occurring in this 2000 period. So it just became much easier. Homes became a cash machine, right? And this led to some of the problems we had. But for our purposes, this is really nice because, and I should say, our data really begin in the early 90s. We're going to be looking at home prices from 93 to 2003. So this is this nice span of we have pre-data and during data, I should say. So this is where a lot of the variation is going to be coming from. But it was both that families in these boom areas received huge increases in this asset, housing prices, and it was also the case that this asset that grew became more liquid, and they could more easily extract it. The bottom line is I adjust the top line using a home price index as a deflator, as a price deflator. And the idea is that you would expect extractions in levels to increase when the asset level increases, right? So this is a way, just a kind of quick way to think about, well, was it just home price increases, or was this actually an increase in the amount of equity in the proportion of equity people are extracting of their homes? And indeed it was. About half of the increase you can attribute to the home price increase, and about half is residual, which I think of as the increasing liquidity of home equity. And so to preview our results and what we're going to do, we're going to get at this problem in several ways, most of which is kind of driven by this problem that it's hard to characterize, as we were saying before, very hard to characterize college quality. Right? What does it mean to go to a higher quality university? You can think of this as oh, it means going to a flagship school relative to a non-state flagship school, or going to a 4-year versus a 2-year school. You can think about it as going to a school with higher SAT scores, with higher tuition, with higher average graduation rates or expenditures per student. And we're going to try and be as agnostic as possible about what it means to be going to a higher quality university. Basically what that means is we're going to try and throw every quality measure we can, use every quality measure we can as a dependent variable and see what happens. So the first thing we're going to do is estimate multinomial logit models over 4 sectors: flagship, state flagship, state non-flagship, community colleges, and 4-year and private schools. All right, with non-flagship state schools as the excluded category. We're going to see how this variation in individual home prices affects the likelihood of enrolling in these different sectors. Okay, and basically we're going to find that a 4-year increase in home prices prior to the kid turning 18 leads to a 0.0021 percentage point increase in the likelihood of attending a state flagship, and a 0.0064 percentage point decline in the likelihood of attending a community college. And I will interpret these numbers for you, showing you that actually these small marginal effects turn out to be pretty sizable when you compare them to the baseline probabilities and the size of the housing price variation. And we're also going to show you that the estimates are stronger for relatively lower income households. Right? So this is, in particular, it's hard in this study, and in some sense it's not necessary, but we would like to know whether the mechanism driving this is a wealth effect, right? People have more money, they consume more quality college, or whether it's some kind of binding liquidity constraint. And my interpretation of the lower income household effect is that I think this evidence is a little more consistent with a liquidity constraint interpretation. Because the angle curve would have to look a little weird to be generating the higher wealth effects for lower income people without liquidity constraints. But at the end of the day, that's the evidence on which this is based. So you can take off what you will, but this is an important, we know that college attendance behavior is lower for lower income households, and so we care about the processes that drive their decisions anyways.
Is home ownership lower as well?
Yes, yes. So we're going to look at, yeah. So what, I'm going to talk about home ownership endogeneity a little bit. Is that your concern, or?
Maybe. I'm not sure what my concern is.
Right, good. I hope you are all thoroughly confused by the end of this talk. That's my goal. So that, well, I'm going to talk more about, I'll show you the estimating equations and stuff, so we'll come back to it. And so then we're going to kind of do a similar analysis, but instead of a multinomial logit model, we're just going to have observable institutional resources as a dependent variable. So average SAT scores, faculty-student ratios, per-student expenditures, graduation rates, and in-state and out-of-state tuition. And we're going to find that all the types of schools on these observable measures that students select into are also affected by this in a positive manner. Right? So they're going to schools. They're not only more likely to go to flagship schools and less likely to go to community colleges, but they're more likely to go to schools that have higher observable resources on average. And again, these effects are most prevalent for the lower-income families. So that's where we're going. And the data we're going to use for this are the restricted use NLSY 97. And they contain a whole wealth of information that's very helpful for us. So first, they contain data on which college you actually attended. And we're going to define your sector of college attendance, or the resource of the college you go to, by the first college you attend after high school. And we have the MSA the respondents lived in 1997, and we have very detailed demographic information for the respondents, including Armed Forces qualifying test scores. And these AFQT scores, combined with mothers' and fathers' education and parental income, are very powerful variables in controlling for selection, okay? Plus MSA or state fixed effects, right? So I feel like we're in a pretty good boat. I mean, the Black and Smith paper use only basically those 4 variables to control for selection, right? And so we have even more than this, because on top of this, we have what I'm arguing is, or what we're arguing is very exogenous or quasi-exogenous variation conditional on the observables, exogenous variation in home prices, right? So we can go a little further than that, but I think it's worth emphasizing these AFQT scores in particular are a really nice thing to have. We don't have a huge sample. We have a sample of 2,764 students who are aged 12 to 17 in 1997 and who attended a college within 2 years of turning 18. and who have valid AFQT scores. So there's this weird thing in the NLS Y97 that about 16% of the sample doesn't have an AFQT score. And everybody drops those students, including us. I don't have a good way to justify, other than Heckman does it, that we do this. So, so if you disagree, I'm going to tell Jim that, it would be it would be nice to know why those are missing. I'd never gotten a good answer from people about why. But anyways, hands on the table, we do this. Right, and we're going to categorize these first institution attended into 4 categories that I talked about before. And so these individual home prices, it's I think important to think about how we calculate these. So one of the drawbacks that actually turns into something that's helpful for us is that we only observe your home price in 1997, and we only observe your MSA location in 1997 and your home ownership status in 1997. Pardon me. So what we do is we need the home price in every year for homeowners. So what we do is we take your 1997 price and just inflate it or deflate it by this conventional mortgage housing price index, which is this index of all repeat sale single-family homes that are securitized by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in a given city in a given year. All right? And so people argue about whether the CMHPI matches the aggregate CMHPI matches the aggregate price trend. So we think not only is that evidence that these are getting at real home price changes, but it also doesn't look like there's massive there's a lot of measurement error in these price measures. But so we're going to do that for every year, and then the 4-year home price change is just the imputed home price in time t minus the imputed home price in t minus 4. All right, so that's going to be our main independent variable of interest. And I'll talk more when I talk about the model about basically this is all the sources of variation that are driving home price changes, and so we need to think through what all those are and whether we think they're exogenous, and I will talk about those in a little bit.
Mike, may I ask you just a quick question? So when you mentioned this better quality of education, how do we differentiate that from just simply more expensive college?
So they are more expensive. So that's important that they're more expensive, right? So the issue is, why would, if they weren't of higher quality, why would students, when they get more money, go to more expensive schools?
Right. I guess, I doubt the correlation between the quality and expense will be one. I doubt it.
So actually, this is perfect lead into the next slide. So one of the things I want to convince you of is that this non-flagship, flagship, 2-year in particular setup is actually measuring something real about these schools. Okay, and so these are these are averages across these 4 types for the U.S. And as you can see, so if you just look at the flagship, non-public flagship, or the non-flagship public, flagship public schools, there's large differences, right? So there's about a 70-point SAT difference on average across those 2. Faculty-student ratios are higher in the flagship publics. Expenditures per student are massively higher. A lot of this is going to be driven by research. But even instructional expenditures per student is almost twice in the flagships than in the non-flagships. Graduation rates are much higher. Again, a lot of this is, based on selection, but insofar as peers matter, right, then this is an outcome we care about. But also critically, tuition's higher, right? So the evidence is that, or at least looking across these 2 sectors, that these schools have more resources, have better students, however you want to define it, right, are of higher quality based on all of these measures, but they're also more expensive to attend, right? And that's the idea. This is what's driving the potential for there to be an income effect or a liquidity constraint, right? Is that students might want to gain access to these schools and might be admitted, but they don't go because of the cost. Our evidence, to the extent that we believe it, suggests that that might actually have important effects for their long-run wage and educational attainment outcomes, right? And so we want to know whether giving students more money affects their decisions to sort across these sectors. And similarly, when we look at the 2-year sector, right, this is dramatic, and I don't think a surprise, that there are huge resource differences across these 2 across the 2-year and all of the public sectors. Okay, and they're much cheaper. So the fact that price is related to quality, that's true, but that's exactly the point, right? Is that you have to pay more to get access to this quality. And so we want to understand then whether people who get this housing price shock go to these higher quality schools. So does that answer the kind of the question? Okay. The other thing, so the private 4 years, on average, they don't, so this is the average of all the private 4 years. We've split up, so the sample of students who go to private 4 years is small. We only have 2,700 students. We've split it up, it doesn't really do much. So we put them together because we can't, it doesn't really do much for us to split it up. Things are a little all over. It doesn't affect these other estimates, but we can't really distinguish what's going on within the private 4-year sector. So we group them together, I think is the right way to say it. So our real focus is going to be on the 2-year flagship public, non-flagship public choice, but that's really the choice that most public sector enrollment, or private sector enrollments, about 20% maybe in the United States. So the marginal student is choosing on this margin, right, within the public schools. So this is a relevant margin. And almost no one really has looked at, in particular, how students choose across different types of 4-year public schools in their states. And so this is a relevant choice for people, an important choice, and we just don't know very much about it.
It doesn't seem like, say in Michigan, the just below marginal student has a choice to go to University of Michigan, do they? I mean, it's very restricted.
Right. So this is the question. So this is why the observable characteristics of the students come in, right? So we need to control for the fact that there's a 2-sided selection process. So if it's the case that people don't go to Michigan just because they don't get in, then this should not, to the extent that the housing price variation is exogenous, we should see zeros, because it won't affect cognitive ability and won't affect access to these schools. Does that make sense? So this should only affect access if it's conditional upon getting in, right, or applying, right? So, conditional on wanting to get in and being able to, if then it's affecting your decision. So that's our argument, at least.
I'm just thinking the relative comparison is those that qualify for the University of Michigan.
Right. In some sense, we want to know whether you get into University of Michigan, right, and you go to Eastern because it's cheaper. That's kind of the question we're thinking about. There are people that do this. And so the issue is if their parents saw a spike in their home price while they're in high school.
These other people what have these others in the comparison group?
Which others? Because we don't know that. I mean, this is a national sample. There's very difficult selection rules governing this stuff. And so, we don't have data on what schools you applied to, on what schools you got into. We just know where you went. And so, maybe in some sense you want to see this by, AFQT quartile or something. That would be interesting to look at, right? Whether this is binding on really, really smart students. We haven't looked at that, but we could. So, yeah.
Did you take into account at any point the difference in availability of financial aid at these different qualities of university?
No, so we can't because we don't observe it, and that's an important point. So, I think so. First of all, housing wealth is excludable from financial aid in our sample. So, from federal and most state financial aid systems that use the federal methodology. So, you could have a $20 million home, and you have $20 million of equity in your home and still receive a Pell Grant. The number of people who do that is like 0 because it's really hard to. Anyways, yeah. So, but the point is that's physically, that's technically possible. To the extent that financial aid eliminates all of the liquidity constraints, right, then we'll either only be identifying a consumption effect or we should find zeros. But to the extent to which the financial aid system undoes some of these wealth effects, then it should be biasing us towards 0, or at least that's the argument that makes kind of sense to me. So we don't find any effects on the private 4-year sector. And I think the reason we're not finding effects in the 4-year sector is because the 4-year schools actually account for home equity and financial aid. So they usually have different financial aid rules, and they will tax your home equity. And so a nice interpretation of why we're finding action in the public sector and not in the private sector is because of that. But that's as far as we can go because we really don't have financial aid packages. I can show you, and we have, I probably won't get to it today, but it's in the paper. We show that financial aid, state-level financial aid allocations do not seem responsive to this housing price variation. So it doesn't seem like states are giving off any more financial aid, or less financial aid really, than they were before due to this. And that's as much as we can say. It's a drawback, but it's a data constraint issue. Yes?
Just maybe similar, another way of looking at the same question, but do we have any way of knowing what is the percentage of tuition actually paid for by the parents?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same question, and we don't in the NLS Y97. We can look back. I am pretty sure that there's no financial aid, but yeah, that would be a nice variable to have, right? So, percent.
You look at a little bit of like the NIPSAS data.
What's that?
The National Post-Secondary Student Aid Survey. I didn't know I knew that, so it just came out. That's, oh yeah, but they don't have home prices in the NIPSAS or home ownership because they don't need it because it's not on the FAFSA, right? So it's we could, but it's not. It's not. Yeah, it wouldn't allow us to do this. And this is actually, I mean, this is one of the problems with doing a paper like this is that often the data, like there aren't a lot of data sets that have even a subset of all the things you need to estimate this. So what? Yeah, exactly. So I think we have enough here, but there are the financial aid. But you know, my prior is that the financial aid will bias things towards zero.
The federal aid seems to be growing across the U.S. So does that?
Actually, over this time period, it was declining. They just recently bumped up the Pell and the Stafford loans, but over this period, the real value of the Max Pell and Stafford were declining. But we're going to have like cohort effects, and so to the extent that this was, you know, what you'd need was for aid to be targeted systematically to the areas and the cohorts that got the biggest housing price booms, that got the biggest housing price shocks. I don't see a reason why that would be the case. And you know, if it was more aid, then it would bias us positively, and less, then it would be negatively. But I'm not aware of any evidence that that's what was happening. So, yeah. All right. So just quickly, these are some of the full set of observables or means are in the paper. These are just some of the ones I want to highlight. So first of all, this is the average change among homeowners of home prices over the 4 years. $52,000 is the average. And 80% of our sample own a home. So this is a serious amount of variation. And look at the standard deviation. It's bigger than the mean, right? So this is there's a lot going on here, which is what the point is of the paper. So, and then kind of predictably, if you look across different income groups, right, the lower income have a less increase in home prices, but as a proportion of their total resources, this is likely to be very sizable. It's still $32,000. And then, you know, middle and high get the most. So let me just, as a caveat, because this is kind of hidden at the bottom, the low income group here we define in a kind of non-standard way. It's families who make under $75,000. And the reason the word low here is in relationship to the middle and high, not low as in how we usually think about it. And the reason is we wanted to find the kind of the middle class, right? And the people who are taxed out of the federal financial aid system and who have to foot most of the tuition bill themselves, because we think that's a very relevant group for thinking about the effect of prices. And so that's, or resources on family, or on decisions. So that's why we define it in this way. You know, if you looked at students who make families under $30,000, so few go to college, and we have and own homes. And
that's where I thought you were headed with
yeah,
I'm thinking, I'm missing.
Yeah. So that's the other piece is that so few parents own homes, so few go to college, so few go to elite colleges that there's just not much action. So you can actually think about this group as really you know, this is like the middle class, I think is the way to think about it, which is nice because this is where all of our effects are coming through. So that's a relevant group, I think, for analysis.
I didn't see the ends on there. Are you pretty evenly distributed across that?
Oh, they're in the paper. I don't know the number exactly, but yeah, I should know that. But no, there's fewer of these guys, more of these guys, and fewer of these guys. So this is 75 to 125, and this is over 125. So this is, I think, numerically the largest group, but this is this is where all the action's coming through. Okay. Yeah.
I think I have a question about the same amount of the absolute change of the housing value may well have different impact on the behavior of a different income level. Say like the same amount.
Mm-hmm.
Well, say for the low-income family, if the housing value increased by 50,000,
yeah,
that would be quite different for a family. The income is much higher.
And that's why we're going to look separately across these income groups at the effects.
So my question is whether the absolute value will affect their behavior or the percentage change.
The percentage change relative to
their income, right? So that you change
okay,
the housing value. What is the percentage of this change?
Because you're looking at raw dollar changes,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean, you know, the thing is, when you think about financing a college education, I think the level of the shock might matter, but yeah, it'd be good to look at see like relative to their because this might be they feel richer, right? So
because the behavior part, I mean, say when they change the behavior, it's kind of what percentage,
right?
If the percentage for the wealth, the very affluent families, right? Maybe $50,000 is not too much today. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I that's a good point. I mean, yeah, that's a good point. We can look at that. So, you know, I guess my initial reaction is if $50,000 isn't that important to you, you're probably not. Your behavior is unlikely to be affected. But what?
It depends on where you're at.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. That's right.
So there's got to be, you know, the regional thing to get at.
Right.
What you're interested in.
Yeah, and then income too. So yeah, we could look at that. That's a good thing to throw at this, and we can easily do
and
it.
I have that question too. How many MSAs? How many states? I know you said it
Well,
was
it's national, so it's every state. There's 200 and something MSAs. So.
And they're all represented in your sample. You
yeah.
got Alaska in there?
I don't know. I forgot Alaska.
I can't imagine
The Palin sticker I saw yesterday, notwithstanding. I think the number of clusters, so we cluster everything at the MSA level. I'm pretty sure that's in the paper, but I don't, again, I'm sorry, I don't have it on my. But the paper was distributed, right?
Yes.
Yeah, but it's enough that we don't have to worry about like the clustered standard errors being weird. Wow. So so just another quick thing I want to show is the differences. I think this is an interesting thing to summarize. The differences in the types of schools people go to across these three income groups varies a lot. So the non-flagship publics increases to the middle income and then declines. Flagship public, it's 5% of the low income group who go to college go to a flagship public. 8% of the middle income, but 19% of the high income people. Right? Obviously, AFQT scores are correlated with that as well. But that seems like a dramatic change across these sectors. And then community colleges, there's a dramatic decline and kind of matches that. Right? So it seems that in the data, there's clearly a correlation between college type and income. The question is whether these resources have a causal effect, and that's what we're going to try and get at. And the same story is kind of borne out here, but I'm running out of time. So, all right. Finally, the empirical model, right? So we're gonna most of this is what I talked about. We're going to estimate multinomial logits, right, where the outcomes of the probability of being in one of those sectors, with non-flagship publics excluded. We have a homeownership dummy defined in 1997. This home price change acts as a vector of individual demographic characteristics, AFQT score, family income, mothers and fathers' educational attainment, respondent sex, and race. Z's are vectors of state macroeconomic and higher education provision measures. Pardon me, so real income per capita, the unemployment rate, as a measure of, we want to try and measure supply constraints on the supply side. of higher ed. So we have 4 and 2-year schools separately per 18 to 22-year-olds. We have state aid per 18 to 22-year-olds. And then we have, to try and get at some of the potential correlations between housing prices and labor market returns, we have average, calculated from CPS data, we have BA to AA state wage ratios and BA to high school average state wage ratios. Okay, and I'll talk a little bit more about what these are doing for us. And then we have state fixed effects and cohort fixed effects. The unfortunate truth, and well, let me go to this, but so in this model, we can't use MSA fixed effects. It won't converge. We have too few observations. It does. But I'm going to try and convince you that that's not a big deal. So the thing we really care about, the only parameter here we care about is beta 2. Right? This is a set of parameters here, but we care about beta 2. Let me try and not write on the screen. OK. And so the critical issue then is, do we, right, again, I can't explain to you exactly where this housing price variation is coming from, but what I can try and do is convince you that whatever is driving it, that it seems like it's OK. Right? So it's a weak statement maybe, but all right. So I think it's important to first think about where this home price variation is coming from. Right? So you can kind of think about it in coming from 3 places. The first is 1997 home price levels, right? Because we're going to take the level and then inflate it or deflate it by this home price index. So for a given percentage change, right, people with bigger houses in or more expensive houses in 1997 will get more gains. So that's a potential issue. The second is because we have MSA, we don't have MSA fixed effects, we're allowing for there to be cross-sectional differences across cities within a state in the rate of home price growth, right? So for example, in New York is a great example of this. Home prices skyrocketed in New York City, and in Syracuse, relatively flat, right? So we're using that cross-sectional variation, but you might think that's a real problem because, you know, people in New York are very different from people in Syracuse along measures that you think might affect where they go to school. All right. And the third is changes within cities in the magnitude of home price changes between 1997. Actually, it's really 1993 and 2003. So there's a typo. Okay. So basically, I now want to convince you that these potential sources of biases are not a big deal. So first is if you estimate this model just using 1997 home prices, you see nothing. Okay? There's no effect. It's not even like we can't rule out. There's no relationship between the price of your home in 1997 and what type of school your kid goes to, which is in itself is a shocking result. I think a lot of this is due to the fact that home prices, so actually the way you should interpret this is that the demographic characteristics we observe work, right? So home price levels are terrible measures of wealth because I can go out tomorrow, I can't go, but one could go out tomorrow and buy a $2 million house and have zero equity in it, right? So this is not a wealth measure. It's not even an asset measure. It's just a thing you have a stake in. Okay. So that should tell us, and in other work I've done, I've found no relationship between levels and outcomes. So as far as worrying about that kind of endogeneity, I think that kind of, in my mind, answers that problem. All right. And 2, right, is what are the issues with using cross-sectional variation across cities within a state in growth rates? Well, what's nice is that using, so when we go to the linear model using resource outcomes, resource levels, we can do it both ways. Because we can estimate in the linear model, we can estimate the model with MSA fixed effects. Okay? And so when we do that, it's actually really nice. This paper worked out. So the state fixed effects increase the MSA fixed effects relative to the state fixed effects increase the magnitude of the direct resource effect. So at least in the direct resource regressions, using state fixed effects understates the effect, right? And I showed you before that there's a pretty strong relationship between sector and resources. So it would be a weird story if this was true, but using state fixed effects here caused a massive bias, right? So to the extent we can get at this problem, we're running into a statistical, technological constraint, right? So, but to the extent we can get at it, I think it's suggestive that we don't need to worry about it. So the last piece, the changes within cities and the magnitude of home price changes between 1993 and 2003. The way to think about this is, well, is our home price growth rates exogenous, right? Or are they being driven by something that's affecting unobservables? So here we're actually, it's really nice that no one in our data moves post, I mean they do, but we assign everyone values based on their 1997 outcomes, right? So or place of location, right? So you can think about it as we're running the reduced form of if we observed everyone's locational decisions, we're using the 1997 location as an instrument for the actual, and then we're running the reduced form of that. Okay, so if that's the case, right? So then let's think about like, well, what would bias our results? Well, I'm gonna have to read this because I can't say it. Any selection must be based on families with higher unobserved preferences or access to higher quality schools, sorting into MSAs pre-97 that will have higher housing price growth when their children are in high school, right? So basically, think of a city where the housing prices are gonna start booming in 2000, right? That's saying that the families that move, the bias here that would mess us up is that families with with kids who have higher unobserved levels of ability, right, are more likely to move in if those families have 12-year-olds but not those 16-year-olds. The families with 16 or 17-year-olds who move in don't have kids with higher unobserved ability. Yes, it's possible this is true. I find this to be an unlikely story, but I'm writing the paper, so. If this meshes with some other model of behavior that I'm not seeing, I really want to hear about it, because this seems to me a rather unlikely story to be happening, right? That basically, remember, it also has to be higher unobserved. So it has to be residual to the AFQT scores and all this other stuff, right? And it has to be that kids who have the higher residual unobserved ability, families with younger kids are more likely to move into these MSAs who have that higher ability than older kids. And so I see that as a relatively unlikely thing, but this is the basically, given these other results, this is the identification concern you have to stomach to buy this paper. Sorry. There's always one. Okay. So, and just quickly, is homeownership in 1997 endogenous? But that's the other thing we're doing. We're conditioning on homeownership, right? We have a homeownership dummy, but is that endogenous? Right? Again, so first of all, there's not a ton of room for it to be endogenous with 80% of people owning a home. But again, it would have to be the case that families with higher unobserved likelihood of attendance, basically families with kids with higher unobserved ability, are more likely to own a home in 1997 in the MSAs in which prices will rise more when their kids are in high school, right? So families with, in an MSA, those with 12-year-olds are more likely to own a home than people with 16-year-olds. Again, I find that story odd, if it's indeed, I don't know of any evidence suggesting that was the case. And finally, we stratify on only college goers, and I have this other paper that shows convincingly that the extensive margin of college enrollment was also responsive to housing wealth variation using the PSAD. And I look over time and show that the effects map the timing of the effects map the liquidity boom in housing really nicely, which I kind of argue is, well, okay. You can read the paper if you're interested. But or I can talk to you about it later. But I find a marginal effect of about 0.004. And so including the non-attenders, so we're kind of we're cutting our sample on an endogenous variable, right, which is a no-no. I like the idea of looking only at college attendees. And so the question is this endogenous sample restriction driving our results? And so you can just add them in as their own category, the non-attenders and the multinomial logit, and very nice, again, things worked out here. So you see a very similar marginal effect for the likelihood of going to college, but it doesn't really affect the other estimates. And so this is not being driven by the way we're driving the sample. And so for parsimony, to the extent that I'm able to be parsimonious, we're doing this. So I told you I could talk for like 4 hours. So yeah, exactly. All right, and so the final piece I want to say is I'm running out of time already. So it could be the case that what's driving both the decision to go to a higher quality college, and the decision and housing prices is some unobserved shock, like local labor demand shocks, right? Google builds a plant in an area or something crazy, right? So, so first of all, this is a really cool result. During the housing boom, there was a negative relationship between MSA income growth and housing price growth, right? So that seems to be kind of prima facie evidence that these booms were not happening in places that had labor supply shocks, positive labor supply shocks. You know, high-skilled labor demand is not very localized anyways. Depends who you talk to, whether they buy those results. And you know, we control for this whole wealth of state-level macro shocks as well, so that helps guarantee this. And again, right, selection would have to be occurring prior to 1997 based on these future shocks, which would be potential but not. Yeah.
A little bit of question about you put the control for the state level macroeconomic variables, because all the variance you have is within the state, which is
that's right.
So
but it's not varying. It's not
varying
by year
between the state, right? So it seems to me the state level macroeconomic control does not explain the possible macro shock within the state.
But we're allowing for changes within. So I agree. Like you like some of the stuff at the MSA level. That's trickier, especially with the wage returns and stuff. But yeah, we could look at some of that. The issue. So it controls for some of it, right? Because there could be a state level labor demand shock. Yeah, we can. I mean, some of these measures are available in yeah. Right. So MSA macro measures. All right. Yeah, we could put those in.
Is there a tuition difference between flagship and non-flagship?
Yeah, I showed you that before, that there is. So the flagships are more expensive on average. I'm not going to get to this, but there's a table in the paper that looks to see whether these college resources are affected by state level price changes, and it doesn't really, there's not much there. Yeah.
So this relates to the second point and also about the selection on the space. And there is some work that says that colleges, places that have colleges and flagship colleges tend to have higher home prices.
Right. So that would be a fixed characteristic of the place, though. So that's where, like, if you had an MSA fixed effect, that would do it.
Yeah, since you're looking at only MSAs, so that would be something that simultaneously moves. So.
Well, only if they're building colleges, which over this 6-year period is not really going on. So, right, because we have fixed effects in there. So the raw supply of, I mean, we're actually controlling for number of colleges per 18 to 22-year-olds, but
wouldn't that only be a problem if the growth was correlated? Like you're talking about the level being correlated with there being a college.
No, so places which have colleges grow, and the home prices grow faster there.
Home price growth is faster.
Yeah. Oh. So there's paper by Town and Orgaon by, I think, Donald, I'm not sure the last name is.
What do they attribute that to?
They say since colleges have more amenities, so more people want to come there.
That's a demand side.
Yeah, so it's a demand side.
Right. So actually, so for our purposes, right, that would have to be occurring like in pre-1997, right, based on the future shocks. Yeah, let me think more about that. I mean, we have some controls for some stuff like that, but I don't think if that's exactly what's going on, that could pose some issues. So that's a good thing.
I mean, it's like we looked at from your data, I think, with, you know, since you have places where you have flagship.
Yeah, I can see whether the places that are, yeah, no, that's a good idea. Yeah, no, thank you. That's a really helpful suggestion. All right, so these are the basic results. Kind of foreshadowed them before. A $10,000 increase in home prices in the 4 years prior to 4 years prior to turning 18 leads to a 0.0021 percentage point increase in the likelihood of going to a flagship school, a 0.0064 decline in the likelihood of going to community college, all relative to the non-flagship publics. No effect to the 4-year privates. Yeah, and actually the family income effects are all there as well. Although I trust these less because I haven't thought through I don't know exactly where this variation is coming from. I know more about where this variation is coming from. Or I trust it more, I should say. Okay, so how large are these estimates, right? So, so we have these marginal effects. So the baseline attendance rates are 8.6% and 40.2% respectively, right? So if we divide, this is a 2.4% increase in attendance at the state flagship and a 1.5% decline in the likelihood of going to a community college. So, I mean, this is, I see these as modest, but there, right? But then, this is the magic of this, right? I can take these really tiny numbers and make them big. So when you multiply it through by the massive amount of variation that occurred during this time period, right? These actually become huge, right? So the average was 52,460. So this is a 12.4% increase in flagship and 8.4% decrease in community college attendance, or the likelihood of community college attendance, right? And actually, for the boom kids, right, the 12-year-olds who really came of age during the biggest housing price growth in our sample, it's even larger. Here, the average home price increase over those 4 years was $71,000, all right, which leads to a 16.8% increase in the likelihood of flagship attendance and 11.3% decrease in community college attendance. So, these are pretty big numbers given the large variation we have. So I think that even kind of modest marginal effects translate into important and meaningful selection changes when you think about the size of the variation that occurred in this country over that time period. And so then to get at the income results, again, we unfortunately can't estimate everything separately by income group because we have convergence problems, but we can just interact the variables we care about with the income groups, all right? And that's what we have here. And what you can see is that the flagship public effect is there for actually the bottom and middle group, but it's much larger for the lower income group, and that the community college effect is only there for the lower income group, and it's sizable, right? So these are much bigger marginal effects than we had before, and then actually for the high income group you don't see anything. And again, this is I think a straightforward interpretation of these is that this might be indicating there's some kind of liquidity constraints or credit constraints that are binding on some of these lower income students. Although, it's not definitive.
Yeah. Do you have any idea how many of your subjects went to, say, flagship schools out of home state?
That's a good question. I don't have that offhand. I think Locke knows that.
I'm just thinking of the fact that the vast differences in selectivity between flagship schools in different states.
Yeah, University of Michigan's very different than University of Arkansas, right? Yeah.
Selectivity and expected returns.
Arkansas has a better mess.
Yeah. So no, that's right. So it would be nice to know. I think we do have some information on. I mean, we know what the institution is, right? So we do know.
So there are people that might not get into their home state's flagships and might prefer to go to, if they can afford to, a flagship school next door rather than go to a second-tier school in their own state.
Right. But actually, to the extent that's happening, that's really telling something interesting, right? Because that's a much more expensive proposition than just going to your in-state flagship, because you have to pay out-of-state tuition.
Still less expensive than going to a private
absolutely.
in your own state. It's less selective than your flagship.
Yeah, so it'd be nice to disentangle this a bit into who's going to the state flagship, in-state, and out-of-state. Because if some of this is people now going to out-of-state flagships, this is an even stronger effect than we're estimating. That's a great idea, and we can look at it. I'm not sure how much, so few people do. Yeah, it's an empirical question about how many people do it, and how this is affected. It's a great idea. Okay, and so again, how big are these? Where the baseline attendance rates are lower for the flagship and higher for the community college. So they basically translate into a 6.6% attendance increase at the state flagships and a 4.1% decrease at community colleges. The 4-year home price change was $32,000 average. So, I mean, these are translating into 21.2 and 13.1% changes in the likelihood of going to these schools. And for the 4-year home price changes for 12-year-olds, it was even larger, right? So, for this low-income sample in particular, which is, I think, what the data are telling us is this is the relevant sample for behavior here, and also the sample who have the lowest likelihoods of going to these elite schools. There's a huge shift in their access, or in their enrollment at these colleges, right? Not necessarily their access to. And so that's, again, potentially telling us something about constraints that may be binding on the intensive margin. And that people were using their housing wealth to access these higher quality institutions. So this is just, I'm going to skip this for time, but this is just looking at aggregate shifts. And so now I just want to go to the aggregate resource effects. And these are OLS estimates, exact same model, except these have MSA fixed effects. That's the only difference. And it's a linear model, right? So you can interpret these. So, right, the interpretation is a $10,000 increase in home prices leads to a student going to a school with a higher average SAT score of 1.5 at the 25th percentile. And so you should compare these to like the gap between public and, or the flagship and non-flagship schools was, oh yeah, I'm sorry, let me tell you what these are. So each cell is a different regression. And the top, I'm sorry, yeah, sorry, I was rushing and thanks. So before everything was one regression, right, one multi, yeah. So here, each cell is a different regression and these are the samples on which we run them. Does that make sense? Sorry about that, yeah. Yeah, no, it didn't make sense before. Sorry. Yeah, this is like, this is the problem when you know what you did and no one else did, so I often have that problem. So, so if you just look at all colleges, these are pretty sizable effects, and you see effect across every single resource we can estimate except for in-state tuition, which you basically find as 0. I mean, it's a negative, it's not statistically significant. When you start restricting the types of schools you look at, effects get smaller, particularly when you look at the public four-year sector. They're still there, it's just, the samples here are not huge, so the standard errors go up. All of these, every estimate I've shown you has clustered standard errors at the MSA level as well, so we have 200 observations, basically, is the way to think about it. But here you actually see some in-state tuition effects, so students are going to these in-state schools with higher tuition, and it's getting confounded here. You don't see any effect in the two-year schools. The reason for this actually is that the two-year market is totally dominated by where you live, right? There's this nice paper by Kevin Stang at Michigan that shows this nicely and uses this to estimate the effect of two-year quality. But we wouldn't expect, given that the quality of two-year school you have access to is determined by where you live, you would not expect this to happen. And so this is kind of a robustness check that we pass in some sense. So, okay. And then this is for the four-year sector. We look by income group, and you see some effects for the middle income. I think a lot of this is driven by the notion that students are going to, the flagship margins affected for this group. But again, the biggest effects for the most part are for the lower income students. And some of these marginal effects are big. Going to a school that spends $525 more on average in expenditures and $100 more per student in instructional expenditures. I mean, that seems rather sizable. And they're going to schools that have higher out-of-state tuition, but not in-state tuition. So I'm not sure what to make of that result yet. But anyways, I know I'm totally out of time. Can I show you one more thing? OK. The last thing we want to do is look at the effect on outcomes, right? So who cares if basically, is there any evidence that these students are getting anything out of this? Right, out of their choices, or else, this has been fun, but, see you later. Let's go to lunch. Okay, so, and we're going to look at, in the paper we look at 3 outcomes. Basically, time to degree is weird here because these kids aren't old enough to have, So we're going to look at BA receipt and time between high school and college is our main ones. And remember, let me see, 29%, because that's going to be the relevant number to divide by. And so for the whole sample, you see nothing. But for the low income group, you see that they're much less likely to take time between high school and college, this has got to be, obviously this is not a college quality effect. This is this is an effect of the resources the parents have, right? I would think a lot of these students are probably working for a year after college or whatever, right? So we don't have labor supply behavior, but for those students, but there is evidence that they're less likely to take time, and they're more likely to finish, right? So if you divide this by the likelihood that they finish, right, by 0.29, you get about 2.4%. So a $10,000 increase in the home prices while the kid's in high school leads to a 2.4% increase in the likelihood she graduates from college. All right, which is, that's a pretty big effect, I think. So it's not percentage points, it's percent, right? So and so the question is this a college quality effect or is this a resource effect? Is this just giving parents more money, absent the quality margin, increase the likelihood the kid finishes? It's plausible that. So basically this result we think is some combination that we can't disentangle. But as I led with, one of the things we care about in this paper is what are the behavioral implications of housing price variation. One of the behavioral implications is that middle-class kids are more likely to graduate from college. Part of that's due to the money, part of that's probably due to the quality of schools they're going to. And so this kind of variation I've been showing you, I think, has important outcome effects. And so these are the basic conclusions. I think I've said everything. Let me just conclude by kind of remotivating the importance of these estimates. Right, if you think about what's happened in the last 3 years, home prices have fallen by about 32% since their peak in 2006. And they're continuing, right? The home price recovery has not really started. Let's put it. So if you believe our results, right, they're telling us that this could have important effects, particularly on middle-class kids and the types of schools they go to, the resources they're exposed to when they're in college, and ultimately the likelihood that they finish college. And I think really what this calls for is kind of a more need to think about some policies that can help insulate these families from these housing price fluctuations because it can have long-run effects on not graduating from college, has long-run labor supply effects and effects on all these other outcomes that we care about, right, and growth effects. So I think this might be an area where policy might have a scope for intervention. All right, that's all I had for you. Questions or sorry I went over.
Really good. That's great.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you for everybody for coming. So this was the last of our seminar for this academic year. We'll start up again in September.
With a bang.
Yep.
I should slam something down, right? That's it.
If you aren't currently on our e-communications distribution list, you can be added to our list by simply providing us your email address on the sign-in sheet located in the back of the room, or not in the back of the room, outside the door. Finally, if you'd like to learn more about the Texas Schools Project, you can visit our website. As you leave, there are handsome bookmarks on the back tape outside with the website address. Thanks again for coming. You guys have a good weekend.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.